Well, Helen, thank you for making some time to come talk to us today. How are you? Liking the expo?
It's really amazing. I've been to quite a few internationally and some local, and I think this is quite successful in terms of architecture, in terms of construction, and as well as the government agencies that's represented here.
Yeah, it's such an eclectic group of companies, of product offerings, of industries, because, coming from an outside perspective, right? We're here with a digital marketing firm, with a logistics firm. So we were kind of expecting to see, obviously, construction and design related companies, but everything kind of ancillary and adjacent to that, from software offerings to robotics and things like that. It's really cool. So yeah, it's a fun thing to be a part of. So would you mind giving me a little background about yourself and where you currently are in your organization as well?
Okay, so I studied here in Australia from high school to university, and I have practiced here as an architect before I went overseas for about more than 10 years, and I practiced and traveled across Europe, Asia, and America, and worked on projects from different sectors. I came back to Australia, Sydney in particular, in 2019, and have been with Cox before I left Australia, and have returned after all of my travels and experiences. And it just felt like also the industry has changed a lot in the time that I've been gone. It's really refreshing to see all the changes and the advancing in different ways.
So what are those big changes that you've noticed during that period of time as you've returned to Australia?
I think there has been a huge push in terms of public transport, much better, well connected. I mean, there's still a way to go in terms of, comparing to a city like London, where I was based for a long time while I was overseas. But it has definitely been a huge improvement in terms of connectivity, also the cultural and the shift in terms of people's behavior to public transport and cars.
Yeah.
And also much more kind of mixed-use developments happening, where it's not purely residential, it's not purely shopping center. There's a bit of a blend of both in a lot of precincts that I'm seeing in Sydney. Yeah. Right,
like neighborhoods that actually have all the amenities you need within a reasonable walking distance, where we don't separate our cities by residential, commercial. Industrial is a different beast. I suppose that can stay separate, but residential and commercial obviously should ideally work in tandem. And I think that's really interesting what you say about the progress that's been made in Sydney, because coming from the US, valuing good urban design, it's honestly very frustrating to look around at the built environment in so many US cities, places where there's enormous wealth, a lot of resources, yet the way those resources have been distributed is such where the car has been valued over people. It's places aren't built for people. Most residential neighborhoods don't have basic amenities and are kind of almost their separate fortresses. But I think Sydney represents a good template for how a city can, for a lot of its history, be designed in an auto-oriented way, and then reverse course and make progress. If you look at things like the George Street light rail and pedestrian conversion, and obviously significant investments being made in things like the metro. Maybe the train system could use a little bit of care as well. But Sydney's doing a lot of things right. Like you mentioned, it has a long way to go, but it's, in a way, it's on the precipice of something new, but also it's kind of returning to form in how cities were built and how we operated before the car took over,
Yes, that's right. And it's also, like you were saying, having a lot more mixed-use developments in the neighborhood, mixing up the neighborhoods, where you can walk out of your house and have your work or shopping or other recreational activities available to you, accessible to you. So that is where we're kind of looking at activation of these neighborhoods outside, the 9 to 5, where we used to have the commercial precinct where people go to work and then they catch the public transport or drive back home, where you kind of have those activities all within walking distance, and start to utilize a lot of those third spaces around these developments where people will adapt and people will also make new uses out of these sort of third spaces.
So right now, in terms of third spaces and kind of integrating that into transit station, what's your gold standard for that in Sydney right now? Where do you think kind of shines as an example?
I mean, there's quite a few stations that is opening. Victoria Cross, that's going to open fairly soon, and that will be one of those that will be an example of how we could integrate some of these overstation developments with the transport and also activation of those precincts. More recently, Central Station as well. That used to be quite disconnected in terms of entries and platforms, and also the various spaces that around the station. I think, back in early 2000 or so, they were not really well used, or not used at all. But now they're being repurposed and repositioned into various sort of mixed-use precincts where you have people working, people living, events that could be organized in some of these spaces that's more well designed and adaptable to various size of events. So that's really important, I think, to the people of Sydney.
It is, especially Central being kind of the core of the entire transportation network, or the public transport network. Having it, be a place where people want to be rather than just passing through, that's pretty important. And it has been an incredible change. I was here in 2019 as an intern for this company, and then I actually moved back only 2 months ago. So I haven't been in Sydney very long, and I had no idea the progress that had been made on Central. And seeing it the first time I passed through, because I kind of remembered it as this cavernous, dark place that, other than the main train hall, certainly when you were connecting via the suburban platforms, it was a very unpleasant experience. And then now all this natural light that comes in, and the way the plazas around the station kind of interact, it's very nice. So in terms of your own work, right, what are some of the projects that you would highlight, or I guess you find the most interesting at the moment?
Hawk's architecture is across a lot of sectors, just about every sector that we would have a few projects in the last 60 years. When people think of Hawk's, a lot of people would think of the sports stadiums, the SFS, as well as the National Maritime Museum. So a lot of the sort of civic work that we've done has been quite long-lasting and memorable. More recently, we have been getting into the health and education sector, as well as some well-established precincts that we've master planned, and also then went into detail to actually design and deliver the buildings. Macquarie Park, we're working on quite a few projects there. We are looking at the vision for the entire precinct, sort of larger 10-kilometer radius of area, zooming into specific sites, such as Midtown Ivanhoe with phrases, as well as some of the student housing projects, co-living as well, to address the Macquarie Park University precinct. We also have commercial interior fit outs that is high end to affordable housing. Some of the ones that's more closer to us, that's not exactly small, is the Pitt Street commercial tower above Pitt Street Station as well. And
Nice.
yeah, should have mentioned that first, actually. The Pitt Street Station
save
and
the best
Pitt
for
Street
last.
Tower. I know.
Is that a challenging job site and design to consider, given that you're building over like an active transit project?
Yes, rail projects are always complex, extremely complex in terms of the safety of the passengers, of the users. So they have to be really clearly demarcated from whatever is above. So a lot of those design and detailing, there's big picture sort of design aspirations for the building, but when you actually then start to deliver, a lot of the detailing involves around making sure that we preserve a lot of the separation between the public and the transport system. and what it's about.
There's a similar project going up over Martin Place Station.
Yes.
And always seeing that progress, and it's just it strikes me how complex that is, doing two things at once. You have this you have the tower going up, and then you have the station being built underneath, which, by the way, looks beautiful. All these new metro stations are and the developments that accompany them are really, really nice. Of all the sectors that you just mentioned, I mean, I know we've talked a lot about sort of transit-oriented development and master planning these livable communities. Do you have a particular sector that you favor, that you enjoy working on the most?
The sectors have become more and more diverse. I love working on hotels where you have a lot of communal facilities, not really communal facilities, but recreational spaces within a building where you have accommodation, where you might have convention center, we may have working spaces, you have meeting rooms, you have restaurants, you have retail, and you have car parking, you have all of these spas, gyms, everything under, one roof. And then now with various sectors coming in where residential is not purely residential, there is built to rent, where the amenity factor is almost comparable to a hotel. And we also have co-living and student housing where those common spaces, communal spaces become such a focus. So there's a program of activity that you can enjoy when you go into visit a destination, where with some of the built to rent, a lot of the built to rent development that we're working on, as well as student accommodation and co-living, we are focusing on bringing that sort of amenity to the tenants, and that works with a lot of the current demographic, where a lot of people are working from home, a lot of people are looking for more in their workspace and more in their living space, and to actually be able to somehow blend and integrate the two. Accommodation in its various forms has kind of evolved with how we live now. Yeah.
So if we do think about a given housing unit, right? Aside from, I guess, the obvious of, I'm sure most people who work from home would, of course, like whether it's a second bedroom or a study nook or something like that. What are ways that when space is a big constraint, you guys are making these spaces more inviting for people who have those other needs, like working from home?
It's just being very considered in that square meterage of space that you are allowed to have, for example. So apart from compliance, if you think about a hotel room, which is basically, I think, a lot of those standards for student accommodation, and it's a short-term accommodation in a lot of people's view, and where you're actually spending more time in where you're working or where you're actually there's the recreational activities, to actually then look at joinery. There's no dead spaces. There's making sure that we are utilizing every corner of the room.
Yeah.
Right. So the journey to these spaces, whether you will actually create space in between spaces where near the lifts, where people are waiting for lifts, is it somewhere that you can actually introduce a space to meet, a space to interact, because those private spaces are small. They're working very hard. Are we actually then creating provision in those common spaces, such as cinemas, such as communal living rooms where you have huge TVs, for example, where people can just come down and have a beer, or you have a large, really, really large commercial kitchen where people can sort of have a cook-off. So looking at the demographic that you are targeting in the area, or what type of demographic would be renting or living in this area, and what do they like, what they do on a day-to-day basis or weekly basis, and actually understand them before we design. Having that research is important because everyone is different, and what I think is great might not be what you think is great, right? So to understand what is the current trend for the people that the potential tenants that is identified as will be living in these buildings, and what they actually want, and to actually take away all of our previous designers, like as designers, our prejudice on what we think will work, and then to actually look at what is currently working for the demographic that we are targeting and designing for, and then to just start with a blank canvas for them is important. Yeah.
Do you find that often that maybe what you and your design team kind of come in and think would be best in your own opinion, maybe the research says otherwise?
Oh yeah, absolutely, totally. You know, and we also have a lot of sort of what do you call it, internal reviews, where we need to make sure that everybody, and it's a journey for different generations. I think it is also where I think I found these generational differences make such a recognizing that and also addressing it is so important, is that people are creatures of habit, right? So behavioral change is something that needs to be sort of, you don't even know you are displaying certain behaviors and thinking until someone points it out to you, right? So these sort of subconscious way of identifying with certain habits and culture, it's inherent in human nature, right? It's quite a bit of a journey for designers, for every designer, I think, because everyone will come in with what I prefer or what they prefer instead of what the actual users will prefer. Yeah.
Well, Helen, I want to be mindful of your time here, so we can go ahead and call it, but I really appreciate your time. It's been a fun discussion.
Thank you. Thanks for the conversation. It was really great.
Absolutely.